thank you, and Heather, thank you so much for welcoming me into your beautiful campus here. And I find every single time I'm able to stand still long enough and realise that I can draw on the energy of this land that has been poured into the ground, the knowledge and the wisdom of something like 2,000 generations of Yugara and Turrbal knowledge here in this place. It's no coincidence, I believe, no coincidence at all that a great university has grown up around this place, because knowledge has been transferred here by the traditional owners. Well, we used to say when I was a university student, actually we didn't used to say anything. We weren't talking about how long Aboriginal people had been here when I was at university. But when we did start to have that conversation, we started out saying 40,000 years. Wow. And it was quickly moved on to 50,000 years through research, 60, 70. I heard recently 80,000 years. Do I hear another bid in the audience? Do you know, sometimes when you say 80,000 years of continued existence, of lived knowledge, which of course is wisdom, when you say 60, 70, 80,000 years, people just can't get a handle on that. And so I started saying more than 2,000 generations here of the Yugara and the Turrbal people. Sometimes you'll hear Yugara and sometimes you hear Turrbal and sometimes you'll hear neither, because this is contested land, and that's not of the Yugara and the Turrbal making, let me say. But for all the nations who've poured their knowledge into this land, I am grateful, because I can stand here and I can draw from that knowledge. And that is just something that I absolutely long for every Australian. I know that's a stretch. We know people that for whom a university would just be, it would be a bridge too far. But no, I actually do mean for every Australian. Because this land has a long memory. Only Australia in the entire world can lay claim to the longest continuing culture. But are we all celebrating that? No, not yet. More people than ever before, but not all. Not all. And you know what I love about this? And I love the fact that here is a bequest that has enabled not only this event, but many other events besides, and now a scholarship. Congratulations to the university on that brand new scholarship. Paula and Tony were people who knew their belonging. You found out yesterday, I lived in St. Lucia. Santa Lucia, see, for all of the singing students. The taxi drivers don't know if I say that, so I don't say it. They lived here. This was their belonging. And you know, it makes me a little sad to think that their time in this world ended before so many of the changes that we're seeing now. The language that we use, the inclusion, the idea that we may eventually close the gap. Now I better qualify that, because I don't think I'm talking about the same gap that you might be thinking about. I'm talking about the gap that non-Indigenous people have in their knowledge about their place in the longest continuing culture. You know, I kind of include myself in that journey that I'm talking about tonight, of going from not knowing to knowing. That is such an important journey. I'm a member of the Stolen Generations. So everything I do know about my being as a Yorta Yorta woman, I've learned that. So I've gone from that not knowing to knowing. I know that journey can be difficult. I know it can be tough, but I know it's possible. And that's why I said at the beginning, all Australians, every Australian. How do you get to that place where you feel like you are part of the continuation of the longest continuing culture in the world? How do you get to that? And at the same time, I want to ask, Are you not really angry that you don't already have that? That you don't already feel that? And are you not questioning, why don't I feel that and why don't I know that? And maybe you do know, maybe you've already, I've got a feeling I'm preaching to the choir here, but I feel like maybe the people in this room have already gone some way on that journey from not knowing to knowing. But it's the next critical step that I think we desperately need music. Desperately need music for this next step, because the next step is from the knowing to the understanding. Oh, this land, it has such a long memory. My earliest memory is of me leaning up against my mother, my adopted mother, in church. Mum was a Baptist, a strict Baptist. I don't think there's any other kind of Baptist. My parents were strict Baptists. I wrote a play about it actually a long time ago, and I did it here in Wollongabba at the Princess Theatre, I want to say. Have I got that right? A long time ago in 1998. Some of you weren't even born. Actually, that's probably true. Oh, God. Anyway, white Baptist ABBA fan, yeah. My adopted mum, a strict Baptist, and I can remember I'm very young. I'm so young that I'm there at church in my pyjamas because it's the evening service. Back in the day, we'd just take our children out at night in their pyjamas so they could just fall asleep. And I'm leaning up against Mum and she's singing a hymn. You know, if I close my eyes, I can still hear her voice. Jesus is calling the wanderers yet, wide to their own. God only waits to forgive and forget, hungry wanderers home. I can feel her breath moving in and out. It's the earliest memory I have, music. You know, we've been acquiring and passing on knowledge, all knowledge as First Nations people, through music, art, dance and storytelling. That's the way we held university. Would have happened right here on an evening such as this, outside maybe. It would have been sung, story, danced and painted. And you know, somewhere in your ancestry, somewhere in your history, your personal history of your family, that was also true. That your knowledge was sung and it was danced and it was painted onto the body. It's just that for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on this continent, we've continued that tradition longer than anywhere else. Some years ago now, 6 years actually, I was travelling down to the land of the Gunditjmara people, which, if you think about Victoria, tiny little Victoria down there, freezing tiny little Victoria. I moved there, well, I tell people, when did you move there? Aren't you from Sydney? Yes, I'm from Sydney, I grew up in Sydney. When did you move there? I say 13 winters ago. But down in the southwest corner of Victoria are the lands of the Gunditjmara people. Now, the lands of the Gunditjmara people stretches from about Colac to the imaginary border with South Australia. Of course, it goes beyond that. There was no such border. For the Gunditjmara, it's roughly 2/3 of the size of Germany. Well, Australia's a big continent. You could fit all of Europe onto this continent and throw in the UK quickly before Brexit, and it still wouldn't touch the sides. It's a really big continent. And Gunditjmara country is roughly the size, 2/3 of the size of Germany. And I was travelling down to Gunditjmara country to launch a new course that I developed for another university. And we had invited senior leadership of the Gunditjmara, Uncle Ken Saunders, to come and not only welcome us onto country, but also give a lecture for the launch of this brand new course, Ancient and Contemporary Aboriginal Arts, it was called. I wanted to get as many A's into the title so it would be high up on the list for people to choose the subject. So here I was, and I arrived on Gunditjmara country for the first time. Now this was, let's see, 2013. So this is 3 years after my opera Pecan Summer, and many decades after the many discoveries that I've made to piece together my identity as a member of the stolen generation, the meeting of my Aboriginal family, or many of them. This is decades in, right? So I'm down there, and I'm the head of the Indigenous department at this university, and I'm launching a course, and I'm standing on Gunditjmara country, and it had been a really successful launch, and it was in the evening, and the sun was still up, and it was just cooling down, and beautiful pastel sky, and I looked out at a line of trees, and a shout came at me from that line of trees. I don't know if you have a sense of other dimensions in this world, and some people feel comfortable about talking about that, others not. I don't normally hear things. You feel something every now and then, and it's not something you can see, but it's something you feel. I heard a shout come from that tree, that line of trees. And it increased. It was like a tumult, not a word that you hear very often, but that's the only one I can use to describe what was coming at me. And not only was I hearing it, I was feeling it the way you feel a vibration of a freight train approaching you while you're standing on the platform. I could feel the vibration of that sound. And it showed on my face, obviously, because Uncle Ken stood beside me. He said, "You okay?" I said, "No, not really." And I felt enough courage to tell him what I was experiencing. He said, "Yeah, you're going to feel that. There's a big history on this country, as you would expect there to be." But I didn't know the particular story. I did not know. Can I insert right here that I am a firm believer in the fact that it is okay not to know, and that we should not be fearful in that state. But it's not okay not to find out. But it is okay not to know, because we all start there. We've been taught to fear in this country what we don't know. I'm not sure if I want to pronounce that Aboriginal word because I might get it wrong. I don't know. I might get it wrong. What will happen to me? I mean, look, the first time you said macchiato, you probably had to rehearse it, right? So just rehearse it. This is what I'm saying. And I was down there on country, and Uncle Ken's standing next to me, and this tumult is still happening, and I'm feeling it right here. I said, "I'm not okay because this is what I can sense." He said, "I want to tell you the story. This is a story that I did not know in 2013. I want to tell you that there was a war fought on this country, the Gunditjmara country. It's known as the Eumeralla Wars, plural. It lasted for 23 years. In Australia, there was a war that lasted for 23 years. Where's the plaque? A war that reduced the population of the Gunditjmara people from an estimate of around 9,000. And you might think, wow, it's not many for a country the size, 2/3 the size of Germany. Well, most sustainable practice of culture in the world. That's kind of how you do it. But 9,000 Gunditjmara people in all of their clans and their many dialects, reduced at the end of that war to just 77 people who were rounded up and brought to where we were standing, the Lake Condar mission. The first winter on that mission wiped out a few more Gunditjmara people. It's really a miracle. It's a story of resilience and strength and determination that the Gunditjmara were able to maintain their language, because Aboriginal people, and Torres Strait Islander people, but Aboriginal people and Gunditjmara land and all over this continent were punished if they were heard speaking their language. So a whole generation of parents protected their children by not teaching them. 23 years of aggression on Australia soil. I want you to put up your hand now and honestly say, if before you started singing in this, because I know there are members of the choir and there are members for the orchestra, but put up your hands if you didn't know anything about the Eumeralla Wars before. Then the trip was not made in vain, because now you do know. So you've made the little journey that I made from not knowing to knowing. There was a war and many, many, many wars of aggression all around this country. Really, when you look at the devastation that colonisation wreaked around the world on First Nations people, but here, let's talk about here. Let's talk about our country. Because I actually believe that Australia is grown up enough. I believe we actually are emotionally mature enough to handle this, what I'm about to say. Because the havoc that was wreaked during early colonisation by a ruthless and bloodthirsty imperial colonisers that had come from Britain, it left a divide. And the divide is, and I say is, in this country, you are either the recipient, you are either the beneficiary, rather, it's a better word. You are either the beneficiary of that early process, or you are the people who paid for it. Now, how do we mend those two? How do we mend it? Scholarships and assistance and making sure that we are an inclusive university, that we have reconciliation and action plans, yes, all of those things very important. But really, how much longer can we wait? Both my adopted mother and my Aboriginal mother, Monica Little, and I pay my respects to her now, Yorta Yorta woman, they're both gone. My mothers won't see this. I want to see this. I want you to see this. I want you to celebrate the fact that on Gunditjmara country are the oldest dwellings on the planet. They've just received World Heritage listing. On Budge Bim and on Lake Conda, the oldest dwellings. You may have heard of the fish traps, and I really encourage you to read the book by Bruce Pascoe, Dark Emu, if you want to know more about it. It's a fabulous read. The oldest dwellings, stone dwellings, circular. They are conservatively estimated to be 8,000 years old. Yay! We win! Come here and see these. It's the least you could do. I've been to Stonehenge. Wonderful, magnificent. Thank you, Druids. But what I want to say, well, that's my theory. There are lots of them out there. Here's the thing. Why aren't you feeling like a part of that? You weren't meant to, that's why. You weren't meant to know. Because if you did know the horrors of that time, you just wouldn't be able to get over them. You wouldn't be able to excuse them. But we have to. We have to resolve them. And I think in this step from knowing to understanding, that is where we desperately need music and the other arts. You know, for what do we strive? Why do we build great temples to knowledge? Why do we study anything? Why do we have medical practitioners who keep us alive? Isn't it to know ourselves? And the longest practice of knowing ourselves is through the arts, through music, dance, the painting, the narrative, the story. That's how, as humanity, we have always known ourselves. In your ancestry, the same as mine. It's just on part of my ancestry, from my Aboriginal family. It's been continued longer than anywhere else. You see, because on the other side, on my non-Indigenous side of my biological makeup, it is entirely possible that a relation of mine fought on the other side of that Eumeralla war, or one of the other wars that took place all around this nation, here, on this place. Massacres and war and havoc. It might have been your relations too, and it might have been mine. So how do we make Australia the mature nation that it deserves to be? Lots of different ways. My way just happens to be music, because that's my language, that's what I know, that's how I know. I'm a soprano. I don't sound like one at the moment. That's why I did that little singing before, just to remind you, because this radio voice of mine is much lower. You know, it is a way of knowing, but I just felt that I had to do something that would include more people. And the first thing I did was to write the opera Kinnane Summer. And that premiered in 2010 on country, Yorta Yorta country. On country just means where the story comes from. So Yorta Yorta country, in a place called Marubna in northern Victoria. And it turns out I'm Yorta Yorta, my mother was Yorta Yorta, grandmother Yorta Yorta. And in fact, I didn't know this when I started writing the opera Kinnane Summer, but my grandmother and my grandfather were part of the story that I was writing about, a piece of history from 1939. 80 years ago, called the Walker from Kamragunja Mission Station. Anyway, that's another story. But I'd started using what I know to be the most powerful way to influence people, and that is music, because it transcends the analytical and goes straight into the soul. I started using music with the opera, but I wanted to do something else. And Uncle Ken Saunders, who'd stood beside me on that veranda looking out at that line of trees, Uncle Ken heard, that I was going to be mounting another season of Kinnane Summer in Adelaide this time on Garner country, and he said, well, I'm going to come, and he did. He brought a whole busload of elders from Eumeralla country, and they drove all the way through their country and down through Bowendick country and down into Garner country, and they came to see Kinnane Summer in 2014 in Adelaide. And at the end of that performance we had a function, and Uncle Ken came straight up to me and said, you have to write that story. You have to write the story of the Eumeralla Wars, of those 23 years of aggression. You have to write an opera. Straight away I thought, that makes a lot of sense. This story needs to be told, and classical music can amplify that in a way that no other kind of music can, in my opinion. And so I said to him, but I don't think an opera. It was a war. And knowing quite well many requiems, I've sung my fair share of Mozart and Fauré requiems, the odd rutter. I thought a requiem, a war requiem. And drawing on the inspiration of Benjamin Britten's war requiem, where he had multiple choirs, soloists, the orchestra, and also text, source material from Wilfred Owen, the First World War poet. He departed from the Latin text and used the poetry there to capture the horrors of the First World War, when a generation of men and many, many women were just wiped off the face of the earth in that aggression. I just thought, this is a powerful structure. People question me, it's really, you'd be surprised, the questions I get. How relevant is that to Aboriginal people? Everything is, because we've been doing everything longest. If there's ceremony around death, we've been doing that longest, continuously, here. Don't get mean about it, get part of it. Be part of it. Learn about it, know about it, and then start to understand it. So, Eumeralla, a war requiem, but for what? There was a war. Let's not forget that. And we don't. We know how to acknowledge conflict here. But unlike the conflicts that we could all name, the First World War, the Second World War, Vietnam, the Boer War, where there were treaties and a resolution and a cessation of aggression, no such treaty exists here. No such declaration of peace, as flawed as some of them are. I'm pointing at you, Treaty of Versailles. But here's what I'm saying. No such declaration of peace exists. Not for the Gunditjmara. So it had to be Eumeralla, a war requiem for peace. I'm often quite fussy about, I created a title there. I'm quite fussy about the whole title of the work being used because there's a purpose to it. As there is to most music that we play. Sometimes we forget it. But if you don't forget it, and to all those students who are here today, thanks for not wagging, by the way, I know this is compulsory. For everybody who's here and they're playing in this and they're thinking, oh my, this is really hard, this Gunditjmara language, but I'm going to do it. And there are time signatures and changes of direction and corners that the orchestra have to play that are really tricky. And they're coming to grips with it. And they've got their leaders. And they're going to do it. And they're going to share that. They're going to share it at QPAC. And some people in the audience will totally get it. And others will feel, well, I don't know. What was that about? They're not ready. But they will be. And we have to help them. That journey from not knowing to knowing. I've seen that happen in my lifetime. From me being at university and no one talking about how long Aboriginal people have been here. And when I finished university in 1986, Sydney Conservatorium, it was 2 years away, was the bicentenary. Which, you know, it was a catalyst for change and things have changed very slowly in terms of recognition for Aboriginal people. I want you to know the things that I've learned. That's what I want. Because I've been on that journey. I was denied the opportunity as a child to grow up in community. And you might think, well, how on earth would you have been an opera singer if you'd grown up in community? Probably you wouldn't have been. No, probably not. I would have been a really famous country and western singer. I would have. My uncle was, he was actually a national treasure. Jimmy Little was the most famous Aboriginal man for a long time. First Aboriginal musician to get a gold record back in the day when they awarded those. You know, he was a very famous singer. My mother, Monica, was possibly the best singer in the family, or at least that's what Jimmy always used to say. Monica had the most beautiful voice, but the least opportunity. So I would have sung. That's in my DNA. It's in your DNA. No. We have to do this together. We have to be this mature nation together. We have to put aside the fear that has taken hold of us and stopped us from, perhaps we've inched towards knowing, but it's stopped us from understanding because we're constantly told to fear what we're going to lose. When I was 3 weeks old, I was taken from my Aboriginal mother. My identity was taken. Believe me, if you can think of something worse than that, if you can think of something worse, maybe death, oh well. I feel like the worst thing's already happened, so what do we do from there? Where do we build from there? And not everybody's at the same place. And I'm standing here as a Yorta Yorta woman who's had a particular education. And so I express myself in a particular way. And you know what? Surprise, surprise. Every Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person will have their own particular way of describing their experience. And if you can come to a place where you get to know the communities that live around you and work next to you and study next to you, how enriched you will be. But we have to get away from that internalised fear, the fear about being caught out that we don't know. I just had a rehearsal before this lecture this evening, and it was a wonderful rehearsal. You've got a beautiful chorale here and a wonderful orchestra, and these students are working very, very hard to bring together Sunday's concert. We're working on some of the tricky corners. And I deliberately chose, even though I wrote the work, I keep saying I wrote this several years ago, I kept choosing all of the bits that I don't know, so that, in terms of singing them and muscle memory, so that those students, so that you could see me go through the process of not knowing to knowing and how I figured it out. Now that's what teaching is about. I know universities are about research mostly, but I'm a teacher at heart. And for me, it's about you learning how to learn, learning how to figure it out, not what it is. Sometimes you can't tell somebody what it is in a muscular way to sing that tritone or whatever the phrase happens to be. And I sort of draw that out and I look at Australia and I think here is a nation that went from expecting the Aboriginal population to disappear, to die out. I'm looking over here because I'm getting 2 minutes on. Yes, my phone has failed me, has it? Maybe I've got the sound off. I bet I do. Because someone would ring me, wouldn't they? I don't know. I'm looking to this country to find its strength and its maturity. You know, a couple of years ago, quite famously, I declined the opportunity to sing the national anthem on the largest stage that we have for a performer in Australia, the MCG. I don't sing young and free. I don't. We're not young. This country isn't young, not by any measurement. And take Aboriginal history out for just a second. Even if we say since, 1788, God forbid, we're not young. Even if we say just since Federation, 1901, we're not young. Why is that so important for people to keep saying? Does it excuse something? Does it relinquish your obligation to be mature and grown up and handle the things that divide us? Yes, in my opinion. So I sing the words that Judith Durham launched. I launched them with her a decade ago, actually, in 2009. Judith Durham was a very famous singer, more famous than anybody else I've mentioned today, much more famous than me. First time she called me, I've still got the answering machine that message was on. I don't even use that answering. I don't even have a landline. But I've still got that answering machine because Judith Durham's voice is on there. We launched a new lyric. I'm going to encourage you all to sing it, actually. It's Australians all, let us rejoice in peace and harmony. How does that work for you? It works, doesn't it? Australians all, let us rejoice in peace and harmony. Oh my God, what will the Aboriginals want next? Peace and harmony. Oh, they're always after something. Yeah, peace and harmony that you feel empowered by. What have successive governments got to lose by the population being mature, intelligent and empowered? Let me see. So music fast tracks all of that. We're going to listen to a little excerpt now from Eumeralla so you get a sense of it. This is from the first movement and you'll see, thanks Melissa, in just a second, don't press it just yet. You'll see a little time code across the bottom. This comes compliments from the ABC who recorded it. It's going to be released in its entirety on Foxtel or something like that, maybe next year. So you'll see a little bit of the processing underneath. The conductor is Benjamin Northey on this occasion. On Sunday it will be Warwick Potter, who's worked very hard on this. And to Graham, who's I believe is also here, our director of UniQ Chorale, and to the other musicians who brought so much to it. I thank you. I thank you for listening to me today. We'll hear a bit of Eumeralla now, and then I hope we'll have a time for a question before we finish. This is the first movement. O permial wukatin linan tuta. Munne watakinan pa. Anna walawal.